Welcome to the Writer's Journey podcast. I'm Michael Laran, a science fiction and fantasy author on a journey to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I pull back the curtain on my writing life and how I'm building a writing career while working a full-time job, raising a family, and attending law school classes in the evenings. You can find show notes for this week's episode, a free starter library of my fiction, and much more at michaellaran.com. Hello and welcome to episode 84. 84 is a good number, and I've got a number of things to talk about again this week, a lot of different topics. So I titled the topic of this week's episode, What's Old is New Again, because I found myself over the last couple of days really thinking about this, because I found myself doing some things that I said just a few months ago that I would never do again. Right. So the first thing was that I actually went to a book sale and I walked away with about 40 paperback books, which if you know me, that's kind of remarkable because I have not bought or read a paperback book in about 10 years since I got my Kindle. I said, I have a busy lifestyle. It doesn't make sense for me to carry paperback books around. And so therefore, I'm going to put all my eggs in the Kindle basket. And I'm going to read. I started off reading on a Kindle, and that kind of went out of style for me because it didn't make sense to carry around two devices when I had a phone in my pocket and a Kindle. It just didn't make sense. And so then I started reading on my phone. And that was for the last probably 6 or 7 years how I read 100% of my books. Right. And I read ebooks pretty voraciously, and then audio. I started listening to audiobooks on my phone, and I said, I'm just not going to do paperbacks anymore. And there is a book sale in Des Moines. It's called the Planned Parenthood book sale. And the Planned Parenthood here, they put on a book sale twice a year. It's in April and October. And they basically collect as many used books in the community that they can, and then they sell them at a super, super steep discount to the public. And they actually rent out a exhibition center at the Iowa State Fairgrounds, which is in Des Moines. It's a pretty cool place. It's where they have the state fair. And throughout the rest of the year when the fair's not on, it's not uncommon to see different conventions and exhibitions hosted there. And so they actually they rent out the 4-H center, and it's this giant center, exhibition center, and they fill it with books. And it's literally tables and tables and tables of books. It is a book lover's paradise. And before I got a Kindle, 10 years ago, I would go to this book sale, and I would actually take time off of work to get into the book sale on the first day so that I could get all of the really, really good books. And the first night, I think it costs like $10, and then you can get in and buy as many books as you want. And when I say they're cheap, they are dirt cheap. Like, you can pick up a hardcover book of, you name it, bestseller for like $2, So I would go, this would be a ritual for me twice a year, and I would actually go to this. I would take time off, and I would go to the fairgrounds, and I would wait in line with like 1,000 people, tons of book lovers and booksellers, people trying to snatch up rare and unique and exotic books. And I would get in, I'd pay my $10 and I'd go in and I would just go nuts, and it wouldn't be uncommon for me to spend $100 at a place like this, even though I was working a pretty dead end job, but I just love books that much, And I don't know, it used to be that I would love to go to this. And once I started reading ebooks, it just didn't make sense for me anymore, right? Because you can't buy used ebooks there. It just didn't make sense. And so I stopped going, and I hadn't been in probably 6-7 years. And so I decided, one of the things I want to try to do is study fiction a little bit better. So a few weeks ago, I talked about a new way to study the craft and how I'm trying to be a little bit more intentional when I'm reading. And so I talked about nonfiction and how I want to be a little bit more active when I'm reading nonfiction so that I am retaining the information a little bit better. And I said last week that I was trying to figure out the best way to do that with fiction. And so one of the ideas that I had, and I don't know if it will work, but one of the ideas that I had was sitting down and reading a fiction novel and then going back and picking out 3 to 5 sections that resonated with me, and then studying those sections only, right? But it didn't make sense to go off and purchase tons and tons of ebooks. So I said, why don't I do this? I'm going to pick 2 mega best-selling writers that I admire and whose work resonates with me and it meshes with my style. And I'm going to pick those 2 writers, and those 2 writers are going to be my mentors for the next year. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this book sale, and I'm going to find every single book in the bestsellers backlist, and I'm going to buy it. And then throughout the rest of this year and into next year, I'm going to devour all of those books. And I am going to study them, figure out what makes them work, and figure out what I can learn from that writer, right? And so I went in with a very intentional plan. And the 2 writers that I chose were Michael Crichton and Nora Roberts. Made sense to pick a male and a female. Both of them are mega best-selling writers. Nora Roberts is one of the most prolific writers of her generation, one of the most prolific writers in the world, and I just happen to admire her fiction a lot. I've read a number of her novels. Michael Crichton, I love Michael Crichton. I just can't say enough good things about him and his writing style. And so I said, I'm going to pick them. And so I went to the book sale, and, I went in, and it was kind of sad, actually. So I went into the book sale, and it was like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And normally, like, you can't find a parking spot. Like 6 or 7 years ago, you could not find a parking spot to get into this place. Like, you would have to park on like a gravel lot like 3 blocks away, and then you'd have to lug boxes of books to your car. I mean, it was just terrible. And I literally parked in front of the exhibition center, like literally. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird. And so then when I walked in, I noticed that, hey, there's a lot of empty space in this warehouse. There's usually a lot more things here. Well, it used to be that they would literally fill up this entire, I don't know how many square feet, but I mean, just think about any book convention you've ever been at. I mean, it's huge. They maybe only took up a third of the convention center this time. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is terrible. Like they used to have, I mean, it was just a book lover's paradise, man. I mean, just way cool. And it was kind of sad. I mean, they only had like cookbooks, and they had a lot of mystery books, which was great. And they had a lot of literary fiction, which, just not, I wasn't there for that. And then there was a lot of like military stuff, but there was no science fiction. There was no fantasy. And I was like, boo. And they used to have records. They used to have vinyl records, which was always kind of cool to go through. They used to have DVDs and music, and all of that was gone. And so I went through, and I actually was able to find pretty much every book in Michael Crichton's backlist. And I decided that maybe reading everything that Nora Roberts has written probably was biting off more than I could chew. She literally they had an entire like 6 or 7 bookshelves dedicated to Nora Roberts. There was nothing but Nora Roberts books. Like, they literally had a giant sign like that said Nora Roberts. Like, that's how many books she's written and how many books they were able to find. So I got probably about 20 Nora Roberts novels, and those were like $1 each. I mean, I paid $44 and walked out of there with a bag full of books. It was kind of awesome. So, it goes to show you never say never, right? A week before I came up with this idea, I would have never come up with the idea to go back and buy paperbacks. But now I'm reading paperbacks again. It's kind of weird. And so the second thing that's kind of weird, that's like, wow. And it happened within like 2 or 3 days of each other. And I'm like, wow, this is really strange. So I'm using planners again, like physical planners. So one of the things that I'm doing for 2020, I do all of my strategy and all of my planning for the next year. I always do that in October. And the reason I do that in October is because over the past few years, I've learned that January sneaks up on you. If I don't do it in October, then it doesn't get done until January 1st or 2nd, which, if you're going to plan for the year, you kind of want to hit the ground running, right? And so one of the things that came out of my planning was that I really have a lot more work and a lot more opportunity to do in terms of keeping myself organized. I am fairly disciplined. I've talked plenty of times about the rigorous schedule that I have in my life, but I find that I often forget things throughout the day, like at work, where am I supposed to be at 2:30, or in a meeting, what was something that someone said that, impacted this project. And I was finding that I'm starting to forget a lot of those little details, and I kind of need those details in order to get things done. And it's not just in my work life, it's also in my personal life. It's also in my writing life. And so I thought, I guess have to be better at this. Because there are just some things that kind of fell through the cracks where it's like, I can't let this keep happening, right? And so I started thinking about how to fix that. And so I came up with the idea of, well, what about a planner, and not like a planner app on my phone, but what about an actual physical planner? And so I did some research and did some looking, and I settled on the Passion Planner, which is a really cool. It was a planner that was started with Kickstarter. It was funded with Kickstarter, and it kind of has different sections for every week. It has a schedule. It's got certain things that you can do to reflect on your week and reflect on your month. And I think that the reason I was forgetting a lot of details was because I wasn't building in time to reflect on all the things that have happened in any given week or any given month. So I'm going to try the planner out and see how that goes. And I'm going to go into 2020 with everything planned out. Well, not really, but if for example, someone decides to book me on a podcast interview, I'm going to schedule it on my planner, which is so weird. If you know anything about me, I'm 100% digital. And it's just kind of weird to see me go back like into the physical age where nothing is connected. But maybe it'll help me, maybe it won't, I don't know. But I just have to be a little bit more organized. That is, especially as I'm taking on more projects, and I'm going to start ramping up a lot of the things that I'm doing with the writing next year. It's just going to be really important for me to stay as organized as possible. So what's old is new again. Never say never, because I said I would never read paperbacks again, and look, now I'm reading them. and I said in 7th grade that if I ever opened up another planner again, it would be too soon. I hated planners. I was in middle school, and teachers made you use the planners, and I never used them half the time. And when I did use them, I didn't really care, and I just didn't see the value and the benefit. And I literally swore in 7th grade. I said, if I ever open up one of these things, there's something seriously wrong with me. I'm going to need a lobotomy. And well, probably already had my lobotomy or something. I don't know. So what's old is new again. And what I wanted to talk about this week as well was my strategy for next year. So like I said, I spent October talking about strategy and talking about or planning what I'm going to do for the next year. And so basically what I decided, I have 4 things that I've always focused on for the last 5 years. And that has been people, profit, expenses, and growth. Those are the core vital parts of any business. They are the core vital parts of any writing business. Without people, you can't sell books. Without profit, you can't reinvest that profit back. You can't pay your bills. Without expenses, you got to pay your taxes, right? And growth, you've got to keep growing. You've got to keep producing new products. And that has been the North Star that has guided my writing for a very long time. But I started thinking that I need to maybe take another look at that, because to use the term, what got you here won't get you there, right? So I've been doing this for 5 years, and I'm not a full-time writer yet, and that's for the most part by design. I am doing things that are not sexy, but I think that will lay the foundation for a future career in writing. And so I came up with 4 strategic focuses that are going to guide me over the next 5 years. So in 5 years, I will have been doing this for 10 years, right? And when I sat down 5 years ago and I said I was going to be a writer and I was going to make a career out of my words and out of my imagination, I said I'm probably going to have more failures than successes in the first 10 years. And the first 10 years don't really matter too much to me in terms of whether I make a living, right? That's not important. What was more important when I first started off, I recognized, was that I want to be able to create as much content as quickly as possible, be able to come up with systems to do that, and then also be the master of my craft so that when I do hit that 10-year mark, maybe I can be one of those people that says I'm a 10-year, 15-year overnight success story, right? And so that's why a lot of the decisions that I've made in my career so far, I have not flipped that button in terms of monetization, because it's not that I don't believe that I should be compensated for a lot of the things that I'm doing. I believe that. I believe that very much. But what I really believe is that experimentation is the most important thing, right? Because I want to try a bunch of different things and figure out what works for me, and then figure out what works and then optimize what works, right? But I can't do that if I'm just focused on ROI, if I'm just focused on how do I make this book sell? How do I make that book sell? Instead, how about I write 50, 60 books, see what works, see what doesn't, what lessons can I learn, right? What type of people can I interact with? What will people say about what I've done? What are some of the unexpected benefits that come out of the things that I'm doing, right? So when I started my YouTube channel, that was completely on a whim. I didn't think in a million years that it would make any kind of money. And I'm fortunate that it's making money, right? But I didn't think it would make any kind of meaningful money. When I started the Writer's Journey podcast, that was not a monetization decision at all. It was just simply, how can I develop thought leadership around the art of writing, right? How do you take the art of writing and how do you create some sort of transparency into it so that all of this self-help that's out there, right? How can you, what does good self-help look like for writers, right? Because there are tons of books out there, there are tons of courses, there are tons of you name it, and yet people are still struggling to make money with their writing. Maybe there's a problem with that, and maybe there's a solution. So anyway, that's a long way of saying that my 10-year strategy has been very much one of just experiment, innovate, create, and see what happens, right? And so now that I'm halfway through that, I think I can be a little bit more intentional about what it is that I'm going to do in the last half of my first 10 years as a writer, all right? So I know it sounds foreign and crazy to be thinking about 10 years into the future. That's just not how most people think. But for me, this is very much a marathon, right? And so I came up with 5 focuses that are going to kind of guide my decisions over the next 5 years. The first is to become a world-class content creator, right? So not just books, but also a creator of podcasts, a creator of video, creator of audiobooks, right? Whatever I'm creating, I want to be world-class at it. And I think I've done a pretty good job of creating pretty good content so far. But how do I take that to the next level, right? So I basically did an inventory of all of the intellectual property that I have. So all the books, all the short stories, all the poems, all the podcasts, all the YouTube videos. I added all those up, and I came around to about, I think it was somewhere around 400 pieces of intellectual property. So my goal in the next 5 years is to get to 1,000, right? Get to 1,000 pieces of intellectual property, each one meaningful and effective in its own way, but to create a portfolio that is unbeatable, right, and undeniable. And I've already done a pretty good job, but I've got a lot more work to do. So 1,000 pieces of intellectual property. That sounds crazy, but it's actually easier to get there than you think. And then the second goal I had was to become a world-class marketer and achieve 6 figures per year in sales. Right, so I'm not there yet. I'm not anywhere near that, but that is a goal, right? Can I get there? We'll see. But one of the things I'm going to really start focusing on come January is marketing. It's something that I really haven't paid a whole lot of attention to because for me, it was really just all about the experimentation. But now it's how can I start to measure some of the impact of some of the things that I'm doing, right? How can I become more intentional with sales? How can I become more intentional with networking, right? Because all that leads to a future career, right? So that's one of the things that I'm thinking about, or one of my goals. And then the next goal, the next three are three that are kind of unusual, right? Because I think it would be fairly usual for you to hear a writer say, I want to write more books, right? If they don't write books, then you don't survive. And I think it'd probably be fairly common for a writer to say, I want to make more money, right? So these next three are kind of interesting. So the next goal I have is to become a technology-driven writer, right? So if you think about the writing business, technology is driving a lot of the decisions that we're making. It just is. It's driving the decisions that we're making. It's driving the apps that developers are creating, and it's going to continue to do that. And so if I want to be successful as a writer, I've got to adopt technology. I've got to adopt emerging technologies, blockchain, a lot of the voice technology, right? So that's one of the reasons I jumped into the Amazon Echo devices, doing a flash briefing, the writing tip of the day. That was one reason to leverage an emerging technology. But it's also some other things as well, like artificial intelligence. What does that look like for writers? And how can I adopt that? And how can I embrace that, right? And so I had an idea of, what if I was able to make 100% of my non-essential daily tasks as a writer, 100% of my non-essential daily tasks either automated or outsourced. Meaning, if it's not writing, if it's not marketing, if it's not strategy, how can I automate it or how can I outsource it, right? So that way, the only thing I'm doing in my time is doing the most essential tasks that are going to make money and create content and serve my other goals. That's kind of a lofty goal, right? So what does that look like? What are those tasks? I don't know what those are yet, but what does 100% automating your email look like? What does 100% outsourcing certain tasks look like? I don't know, but that's an interesting area to explore, because how can I use technology to become a technology-driven writer, right? So the next goal I had was to become a data-driven writer, right? So data is kind of a scary word for writers because we don't tend to be numbers people. I certainly am not a numbers person, and I don't have any intention of becoming a numbers person anytime soon. But there is definitely a need for data, right? And if you think about the future, you think about artificial intelligence, data is key, and writers are not necessarily large producers of data, but how can we use data to make decisions? All right. So last week I talked about how the vision that I can see that is very clear to me, that I have not heard anyone else say, but it's very clear to me about traditional publishers, is that traditional publishers are struggling now, right? And the reason they're struggling is because they just have not adopted a lot of the new technology. Their margins are pretty heavy. They have bureaucracy that they have to deal with. And so they are struggling right now, right, to survive in a digital world. But they're getting better at it, right? They're in this for the long haul, just like we are. And what I see in the future is traditional publishers are sitting on just mountains and mountains and mountains of data, right? They have more data than you and I can produce. So if they were to adopt artificial intelligence and leverage that technology, might they be able to create solutions that will help them reasonably predict how a book will do on the market? When they are looking at a book and determining whether they should buy the rights to it, might they be able to run that through a model? And might that model be effective? Models aren't very effective today, but they're going to get better, right? If they can do that, that's going to be an edge. That's going to be the value proposition of a traditional publisher. Whereas an indie writer, we're not necessarily going to have access to that, right? And so we're going to be at a disadvantage if this future comes to pass. And so, going with the traditional publisher is not cool today if you're an indie. People don't want to do that anymore because we have the ability to do everything ourselves. We have control. But if a traditional publisher has that edge and they can predict and they can get a little bit better with their contracts and get a little bit smarter about their distribution, right? Then I think that's going to be an issue. It's going to be something we have to contend with. So that's not coming for another 5 to 10 years, right? So that starts today, figuring out how you are going to survive in a world that has an economic downturn. How are you going to survive in a world where self-publishing is not cool again, right? And traditional publishers are luring indies in, right? And people are starting to sign with traditional publishers who were indie today. They're signing with traditional publishers because they want that data advantage, right? That is the future. That's very clear to me. But again, I have not heard anyone else talk about this. So it either means I'm wrong or I'm just ahead of my time. So one of the things that I want to make sure that I'm ready for is that, right? How can I become a data-driven writer? So here's a thought. What if I could make 100% of my non-writing decisions driven by data? So if it's not related to writing, if it's related to marketing or if it's related to business, whatever that might be, if I can make 100% of my non-writing decisions driven by data, right? And then what if, right? What if I can make 50% of my writing decisions driven by data? Meaning, what about the day-to-day decisions that I have to make about character or about plot or about story? What if those decisions could be informed by data? Now, what I'm not saying is to use data to mold your story. I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying if I come to a crossroads and I need to figure out what to do next in my story, what kind of data can help me make that decision? That's a little unusual, right? That's strange, especially for a creative. But what if that were possible? And that's some of the things I'm going to be exploring as well. And so then the last thing, and I'll move to another topic after this, but I think this is important, right? Because it's just not something that people talk about very much in terms of strategizing. And that is, how can I become the writer of the future, right? How can I become the writer of the future? What does that look like? What does a indie writer who is making a living from their work in the year 2029 look like? Interesting, right? What does that look like? Because a lot of the tools and services that we have today will not exist in 10 years. It's just a fact. So what does that look like? What does the process of writing a book look like in 10 years? What does the process of editing a book look like in 10 years? What will artificial intelligence technology be like in 10 years? I don't know the answer to that, but I can start exploring that now. And one of the things that I really want to focus on is failing, failing and trying new things and experimenting and developing thought leadership and starting to talk about the things that I'm working on and start to talk about the projects that I'm working on in a new and unique way so that I can start documenting all of the failures that I'm making so that I can start to figure out what that looks like. What does the writer of the future look like? And so if I can figure that out, I can share that on YouTube. I can share that on the writer's journey, and I can bring other people along for the ride. Because my biggest fear of what's going to happen is that today's rebels, the self-publishers who dared to go indie and made a living with their work, are going to be tomorrow's dinosaurs, right? It's just human nature. It's just the way of things, right? I don't want to be tomorrow's dinosaur. Yeah, I think it was John Scalzi. He said there are 3 types of people in this world. There are dinosaurs, mammals, and cockroaches. Dinosaurs, they just refuse to adapt, and so they die out as a result. Mammals, they thrive in the moment, but they're too smart for their own good, and they usually cause their own extinction. Cockroaches are going to be around forever. They're going to be around forever. They'll survive a nuclear explosion. There's nothing that can beat them. My goal is to figure out how to be a cockroach, right? So that I can have a career 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I don't need to be a mega bestseller. All I care about is having a career and developing a sustainable income. But what that looks like today is not what that's going to look like in 10 years, and it's not what it's going to look like in 20 years. So how can I become the writer of the future? All right, so those are my strategic focuses for the year. And so as 2020 gets here, you're going to start hearing me talk a little bit more about those strategies, and you're going to start to see me talk a little bit more and be a little bit more transparent about the projects that I'm working on personally that are helping serve those goals. All right, so I hope that wasn't too boring. But what podcast in the writing community have you ever heard where someone talks about their strategy, other than Joanna Penn? Joanna Penn does a phenomenal job of this. But what podcast have you ever heard where someone talks about their actual strategy? I just think it's cool. I think it's something that we probably could do more of, and I think it's really cool to be a fly on the wall and listen to that stuff. So that's something that took up a lot of my time over the last week, is just setting the course. Because, when you're 5 years into something, a lot of people quit after a year. A lot of people quit after 2 years, and a lot more people quit, or people that are still around. Not a lot of people will stick around and do this for 5 years. A lot of the writers that I started with, the people that I talk to and socialize with, they're no longer doing this. It's like that law school example where the professor says, look to your left, look to your right. 2 of you aren't going to be here next year. I don't want to be one of those people that's not here. And so surviving and longevity is something that is incredibly important to me. And I will make decisions based on longevity before return on investment. That's just how I'm built. But at the same time, I'm very, very much always thinking about how to quantify the things that I'm doing, right? So anyway, that strategy. The next book I'm working on, so I'm going to be starting a book here pretty soon, and it's going to be how to write engaging characters. And it's going to be my guide to writing characters that are compelling and that readers will never forget. And this is kind of interesting because it's going to be a fun book, but it's going to also be an interesting one because I have to do a lot of market research for this. This is kind of unlike my other writing books where the topic is pretty niche. Like writing faster, that's kind of niche, right? Mental models for writers, that's super niche. that book's probably not going to sell very well. The Indie Writer's Encyclopedia, it's pretty niche. How to write your first novel, that's a little bit less, right? I mean, that's a little bit more general, that it applies to a broader audience. But how to write engaging characters is very broad, right? That can apply to writers in any genre. It can apply to writers at any skill level. And so I have to really do some market research to figure out what's out there, because there are actually a fair number of books out there, which is, I think, a good thing. But I've got to figure out what it is that I want to say and where my book fits in a little bit different. So over the last day or so, I've been doing some market research and some competitive intelligence and figuring out what all the books that are out there, what makes them unique, what makes them different, what their shortcomings are, and then how I can fit into that and serve readers based on what they're asking for in the reviews, right? So that's always kind of a fun process, and I might do a YouTube video on that because nonfiction is kind of unique in that regard. It's fun. I think it's fun to do competitive intelligence and kind of figure out, what's going on in your genre. But anyway, that is what I'm talking about this week. So let me know if this was boring. I hope it wasn't that boring. I hope it was interesting. Next week, I'm not sure what I'll be talking about yet, but we're almost through October. And this October has been one of the best Octobers I can think of in recent memory. At least since I started law school. It has been relatively stress-free, and I am super, super grateful for that. And super grateful for the great weather too. It's where I live. It's there's a lot of crisp mornings, which is a lot of fun. So wherever you are listening, thank you for listening to this week's episode. I hope you have a phenomenal week and a phenomenal weekend, and I will holler at you next week. Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed this episode, you'll enjoy my backlist episodes at michaelaran.com/podcast. For your free starter library of my favorite novels, join my fan club by visiting michaelaran.com/fanclub. If you're a writer and want to connect with me further, check out my YouTube channel, Author Level Up, for helpful writing advice at authorlevelup.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.